optimum health clinic. And one of the things about obviously recovering from ME chronic fatigue is that everyone's journey is different. Different things help different people at different points on the recovery path in different ways. And so really what we're trying to do is share as many different experiences as we can. So for you guys watching at home, you can perhaps see some of yourself in some of the different stories. And of course, we hope there'll be some practical, useful tips. We know that many of you watching are patients of the clinic, others perhaps are interested in the clinic, and others just finding your own way on the recovery path. But hopefully we can speak to each of those elements. So my guest today is David Bowerman. Hi, David.
Hi.
And David has been a patient at the clinic for a few years, and also has been on the psychology practitioner training program at the clinic as well. So, Dave, we'll talk a little bit about your recovery story, some of the things that helped you along the way. I mean, maybe a good starting point is when you first started experiencing symptoms, like what they were, what that was like. Often it's quite a shock, let's say, for people.
I mean, to me, it was quite gradual. So I was at university and I was in kind of quite a small room that had mold in it. And I started to get some chest pains and then a viral kind of infection. And it kind of stopped me being able to study. Yeah. So I don't think I reacted to it in the most relaxed way, but I didn't kind of freak out.
Maybe we'll come into that a bit more.
But I didn't really freak out about it. It was more just kind of, just kind of a viral thing. It was undiagnosed. Glands were up and stuff.
So you were going to like your GP, or you were?
I went to a GP, but they didn't know what to say, and I was kind of under pressure by someone in the department to push through it. So that's kind of what I did. Okay. So I'd run through it. Yeah.
Like so, literally, you mean go for runs?
Go for runs, swimming, and then that kind of passed for a month or so. But then I went out to Africa where my parents live, and I was working with street children, and I got an amoeba, which had quite a big hit on my system from that.
Sure.
And then that began to affect my stomach as well, because my stomach was one of the first things to begin to go. I kind of have IBS off and on, but it never really had impacted my life. It'd just be after a few drinks, or if I was nervous around an exam.
Sure.
But apart from that, it was fine.
And so you were having some IBS things. You kind of had so they're kind of like warning signs, I guess. Yeah. But I guess at that point you had no context for that. It was just
no context at all. And I remember kind of feeling kind of hot, clammy feeling, and not responding to that in the most relaxed way. I thought it meant I was ill. With hindsight, I don't think that was the case.
Sure.
And then I had glandular fever that was undiagnosed at the time, so I just had no energy and I didn't really know kind of why that was.
And you didn't get a diagnosis of glandular fever?
I got a diagnosis kind of 3 months afterwards.
Okay.
Because they were like, okay, you've had glandular fever, because there's a test you can do retrospectively.
Yeah.
But I think by that point, I don't know, I think my system was kind of quite knackered as it was. And then kind of like trying to push through degree, and then a relationship ended, and it's kind of everything came together, and I partied quite hard, recreational drugs and stuff at university. And it was that actually I kind of had an experience where my way of dealing with it was I was working as a support worker with high need students. I took time out of university. And then at the weekends I'd party really hard and run really hard and work out and box and train and do all those things. But then my physical system was kind of okay, but I got to a point where I just got really anxious.
Yes.
And then kind of my stomach stopped really working, and I responded to that with anxiety.
Sure.
And then gradually wasn't able to work, and it just kind of got worse over the kind of months that followed. So it's kind of a gradual onset, I guess.
Yes. I guess a gradual onset with, in hindsight, various kind of, of course you can look back at these kind of things and go, well, of course, if you hadn't just kept pushing through, you hadn't had that advice, you hadn't been going running and partying, might have been a slightly different scenario. Nonetheless, of course, we don't realize that at the time.
No.
So what was the point where you really recognized like something was going on that was like not right?
I mean, I went back to university because I'd suspended, and I just wasn't able to get into lectures. And I'd try, so I'd kind of do the studying, that kind of point, just kind of things weren't really working. My body wasn't really working.
So
And I
you-
definitely, with hindsight, I could see how it was a combination of my body not working and then responding with it to anxiety.
Yes.
Um,
And when you say body not working, like what were the main symptoms?
I mean, the
you were
main
experiencing?
symptoms, I guess, were fatigue. So I'd walk to the pub at this point, not drinking, having a glass of water with my friends, watching the rugby, and just like feel my system just being knackered.
Yeah.
And then with hindsight, I can see that there was that, and then on top of that was anxiety. So it was like the combination made me feel like everything's kind of crashing almost.
And I guess in a sense, the anxiety, because you were getting the symptoms, right? It was like you were
Yeah.
feeling more and more exhausted, and then was anxiety worrying about why am I so tired?
Yeah, I mean that kind of thing. I mean, at the time, wasn't even that aware I was anxious. It was more kind of looking back. Looking back, I could see how, as I got iller and it impacted on my life more, I responded more to what was happening with me with anxiety. At the time, I think I just thought I was really ill because it was kind of all enmeshed into one thing, entangled. And I could then see the path down, as it were. It's like the worse my life got, and gradually kind of lost girlfriend and had to stop my degree and kind of move eventually to Africa to be like looked after by my parents. It was then it's like, wow, this is a huge threat to my life. This is a huge threat to me. So every time I'd feel ill, there would be some anxiety as a response to it.
Yeah, and we'll come in a minute, I think, to talk a bit more about the anxiety side, but just on a kind of physical level, like there must have been a pretty, well, what was that like to kind of be at a point where kind of, apart from of course anxious about it, but also like to not be able to do all the things that you wanted to be able to do?
I mean, it was pretty scary because I didn't really know what was happening to me. And also that everything that I kind of read essentially just said once the doctor said we think it's chronic fatigue. I mean, first they said you might be depressed, and they put me antidepressants, and that didn't do anything. But gradually, it was really challenging. It was hard. Just thinking about it, it was tough, and I guess I felt like I was losing my sense of self. Because I was always kind of gregarious and outgoing and really social, and I don't know, doing lots of kind of fundraising or kind of charity type stuff. I had a very busy life, and then slowly that just kind of trickled away.
So you're back in Africa with your parents. You've kind of you've broken up with your girlfriend. You've kind of left university. What at that point? Obviously, it was clear that something was kind of going on. What happened from?
And we thought it was chronic fatigue then.
Okay.
And I'd come across Dr. Smith's work, which is this kind of idea that if you split up the amount of time you have, let's say you've got an hour's energy in a day, you kind of do a little bit of that each hour, and you gradually build. And yes, I kind of just didn't do much. I would like lie in bed and listen to audiobooks.
So you actually, at that point, you let your body rest?
Yeah, I let my body rest. Yeah, I was kind of letting my body rest for 6 months prior, but because it kind of gradually got worse again. But yeah, because moving to Africa was the last straw. It's like, I felt like I kind of exhausted all the support that was kind of based in England, and I had to go there. And yeah, it was an interesting experience. At that point, kind of I'd get crashes. So what I mean by that is I would feel physically exhausted, and then my heart would start going, and I'd feel like my whole system was shutting down. And that was one of my major symptoms, as well as this kind of flu-type feeling, general kind of malaise, and incredibly severe IBS. And so I'd kind of lie in bed, or I'd walk around the little compound that's probably about 15 meters a couple of times, listening to T.S. Eliot, trying to learn it because just love his work. So just kind of not much was happening. Wouldn't go out of the house very much.
Okay. So then what was the turning point from there?
I mean, I guess coming to see you guys.
I haven't paid you to say that.
No. My mum got really desperate. We came back for the summer to the UK, and I began to freak out because they essentially said, the NHS, they wouldn't pay for me to go and see Dr. Smith. And that was in my mind, from what I'd read.
Yes.
So
you'd be following his advice kind of remotely.
Remotely, and just kind of, there were people saying, look, he helps me get better.
Yeah,
and it's the first time I'd found stories of people getting better, because it's a really hard thing to find.
Sure.
Apart from, it just thought, okay. And then they said no, and I freaked out. I kind of had a really panic type attack. And my mum just put into Google chronic fatigue, and you guys came up.
Okay.
So then went to see you quite soon after that, did a 90-day program.
And what was that? What was that like, coming to do the 90-day program? I mean, was it kind of, because some people it's kind of this immediate kind of sense of hope and possibility. For other people, it's like, oh my God, there's all this new stuff I have to learn. Other people, it's like, what do you mean? There's like, I said, what was
it just clicked.
Okay.
I remember, it was interesting. Like last night, I was staying in the room that I stayed in, kind of it's about 4 years ago.
Okay. That's
hadn't stayed there.
Deja vu kind of.
Yeah, hadn't stayed there since, in same bed, and I just remember how closed off and scared I was of everything.
Yeah.
But it clicked, like maladaptive stress response, kind of the anxiety, because previously when I'd looked at IBS and I'd looked at the symptoms and I looked at the symptoms of anxiety, IBS, chronic fatigue, like they are pretty similar, like sensitivity to heat, kind of, panic attacks, heartbeat, discomfort. I mean, they're all, to me, like they look very intermingled. So that made sense.
Okay.
And I remember saying outside to someone who was on the course that when I have a slither of blue to aim for, then I will do that, and I will work hard at it. So kind of from that point, I was determined. Like the 2 hours energy I had a day was like an hour and a little bit of that was on doing things to help me move forward.
Okay.
Kind of working through materials, or it kind of got to a point where I would get up, I would have breakfast, kind of laugh with someone. My parents have a cook in Africa, not very PC, but and would laugh with her a little bit normally, and then I kind of do 15 minutes EFT, like 10 minutes meditation, and 10 minutes self-hypnosis, and I do that again before going to bed.
And did you immediately notice a benefit from
that, or
was it slow? Okay, good.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's something I've seen now, kind of working with non-paying clients, then paying clients. Sometimes, when you become aware of what's happening, you can kind of get down about being down, or anxious about being anxious. And I think that happened to me. So I was like tapping away on being anxious about my anxiety, because I could see that was a direct kind of link. That made complete sense to me.
But interesting that made sense, and you're working with it, and initially you felt worse for it, which of course can happen. You know? So how was that? Were you kind of okay with that, or was there kind of a sense of like, I mean, it's like I was bad enough, thank you, Optimum Health Clinic, and now it's like you taught me the stuff, and initially
I can remember driving away from here, just going round and round, like even worse, like thinking about everything in an anxious way. And my mum was like, "What have I done?" But it kind of got better, and it got better just by chipping away, and things gradually began to shift.
So say more about that. So it felt worse initially, and then you started. Nonetheless, you had a certain commitment to kind of work with things. Yeah,
complete. I believed in it. It made. I had this belief that once I was anxiety free, I'd be better in a few weeks.
Okay.
Just because. Yeah, just that made sense. And then. I would just chip away at it, and I had kind of moments of. At that point, I just began to try and accept where I was more. So I kind of had time. We had a security guard. My parents, they're quite open people, and he was an alcoholic in Uganda, and most people would have probably sent him on his way quite a long time before, because you'd find him drunk in the middle of the road. So he kind of became my pet.
Not the best form of security.
No. So he became kind of my pet project of like just making sure he had food, and like kind of go and get him food, or like. That kind of thing, and that was just a nice little things
so
like
kind
that.
Of focus outside of your own
focus
experience.
Outside of me more, as well as this kind of gentle working away at things. And then the turning point kind of came. I came back at Christmas, and I can't remember the year, but there was snow, and we were stuck on the motorway, and I had to walk. And it kind of proved to me I could do more than I thought I could do, which was interesting. And then I realised that this flu-type symptom was essentially just normally an anxious response to being hot, and so I was like, I'm not hot. I'm in England, and And that was kind of a turning point for me. I was like, right, okay, I'm coming back. Instantly came back, found some people, some friends live in a house my parents own, and they'd look after me while having rent. And that was kind of one of the major turning points.
Yes. And it's a really interesting transition point, that, because often in the early stages, as you described, we think we can do far more than we can.
Yeah.
And so we keep trying to do too much and we keep crashing. And then if we do the right things and the body gets rest over time, of course, energy starts to come back.
Sure.
And there's often then that point where for some people we can actually do more than we think we can.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting turning point, because at that point it's like, wow, something really is fundamentally different. Even if it's a kind of glimmer of something being different, it's definitely a kind of a turning point.
Yeah, and it was like, again, come back to the UK, being determined, and then I began to realise that this crashing thing was like some fatigue, but then lots of anxiety on top of it. So I'd work with EFT when it started to happen, and I'd be able to relax into it, and then it wouldn't happen so much.
Yes.
So I began to see that kind of part of my symptoms were emotional anxiety created.
Yes.
Some of them completely, which was really interesting for me,
Yeah.
because they felt totally real and they were horrible, and I felt they felt horrendous. But the amazing thing was, as I, with EFT and stops, began to relax into them, a lot of them lessened and passed. Some of them completely, some of them there's still some fatigue there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I should just give some context that the stop technique and EFT are things that you learn on the 90-day program. But what you're saying is really interesting, that we can have very real physical symptoms and we can feel very clear. These are, and they really are, physical symptoms. And yet we can work with them from a psycho-emotional perspective, and that can directly affect the symptoms.
Yeah.
And of course that isn't always the case in all situations or all stages of recovery, but there's certainly, in your experience and other people's experience, at certain stages of recovery, in certain subgroups, that absolutely can be the case. And I wonder how that was to recognize that rather than being totally a victim to the symptoms, there was actually something that you could do with them.
I mean, it was big. I mean, I still really, it was really big. I began just to do a bit more. And I began just to see the parallels more and more. I read a book of like 50 people who got better from chronic fatigue, and only one didn't.
CFS recovery.
I think it was. Only one didn't.
Barton,
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
Only one didn't do something like yoga or meditation or something that essentially helped them on that kind of, in that side of things as well. Like it was maybe nutrition combined, but it was almost always there was that component. And so then it made real sense to me, right, okay, anxiety combined with this makes these things feel much worse.
Yes.
And so I gradually began to be able to do more, and I'd push through almost. Push my body a little. I'd go for a little bike ride, and then I'd feel my heart going, and I'd kind of calm my system, come into my body, and then maybe go a little bit further. And quite quickly I was able to do a lot more.
Yes.
And again, kind of got surprised. It was a friend's birthday, the person who was caring for me, and I started making people drinks, and I just had 2 drinks, I think it was, and I just went out and had this amazing night and danced, met a beautiful girl. It was pretty fun.
It was a great night.
It was, and then just invited loads of people back to my house, and was this kind of, I had suddenly found like all this energy I had that I never thought I did.
Yeah.
And that was quite a big kind of turning point.
What was it like to suddenly go, oh my God, like I've recovered more than I thought I had?
See, I don't know if it was I'd recovered more, or if it was just that a large part of my stuff was emotional. That's the thing I can't really say. But
it could be either. I know cases where it's absolutely someone at a previous stage, they just, even if they were in the calmest state, they couldn't have done that.
Yeah.
And for other people, it's like you flip the state, and it can be quite marked, the effect.
Yeah, so I think it felt like that. And then I would meet up with this girl, and for some reason when I was around her, my mind just got quiet and I felt okay. I then have to go and chill out.
So she was your gateway to the healing state?
Yeah, she was part of it, definitely. I mean, it was a kind of like, she was one of the things that really helped.
Yeah.
It was like seeing that was like kind of a little opening, and then using it. And then kind of moving from that Christmas to that summer, I'd pretty much recovered. I was able to kind of work out and go to festivals and like think about getting a job and look into training and that kind of thing. So, and the interesting thing was I was still anxious. So I hadn't like got rid of all my anxiety. It was just that I'd done enough. I really like a metaphor one of the clinicians used, which was, the kind of the boat or a tanker kind of way down, and you just take enough off it for it to rise.
Yes.
And because I always kind of had in my head, I have to kind of be fully relaxed to get better, and that wasn't the case.
Right.
For me anyway. It was just, So that was just, it was just exciting, kind of cycling through woods and things. That was nice.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to that a bit more in a minute. One of the things that you said to me when we spoke on the phone last week, and we were just discussing what to talk about, was you were saying that you listened to quite a lot of Secrets to Recovery when you were ill.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you said to me is, people sound so together when you hear their story in hindsight.
Sure.
But you're like, Alex, that's not how it felt to you. And I think that's a really good point to make, that, people that are watching this, or people that are, listen to or watched other recovery stories, that in hindsight, it's like the person sounds like it was so smooth and so together and so much clarity and insight and perspective. But that isn't the lived experience. And I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to put it politely, but I was pretty...
Don't put it politely then.
I was mad as batshit. I was just on it. I mean, I was so anxious. I was anxious about listening to music. How do I listen to music? I mean, looking back, it's crazy. About walking 10 steps, about cooking for myself. I mean, at my lowest point, I remember I would quite regularly sit on the bar floor and just cry and say I didn't know what to do. And I'd say to my mind, I wanted to end my life, because the way I saw it in those dark moments, it would get better, was just that I didn't want people to remember me kind of as the person I'd be in those 3 years, as it were, but as I had been before. And so it was incredibly dark, and I was scared of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a wreck. It really was a complete wreck. And then to me, it's quite important to emphasize that, because when people are on this, they are probably putting their best face forward.
Well, also what happens
also,
is it's just when you talk about something in hindsight, there's just a kind of clarity that it sounds clear, and so and right now, like, as I sit here kind of talking to you, you sound very sorted together. Of course, I worked with you a little bit towards the end of your recovery, not kind of at those kind of depths of kind of where you were. But I also know from my own experience, it's like, people kind of, will read my book and say, oh my God, it's such an inspiration. Like, you were so courageous. I was like, it wasn't how it felt. I felt like I was just in hell most of the time. Yeah. I felt totally uncourageous. It only looks courageous in hindsight. And I think it's a really good point. People that are watching this, that are kind of thinking, well, it's all good for David or for Alex or whatever. But right now, it's like just kind of watching this broadcast is triggering a whole load of anxiety. That's not what they felt. And the point you're making, of course, that is what you felt.
Yeah, no, I did. And it was really hard. And I was anxious about everything by kind of my lowest point. And I didn't think I'd ever get better, I don't think. Once I had this kind of slither of blue to aim for, I did work at it, and I began to have some level of belief, but it took time.
Yeah. What would you say were for you the key tools or the key things that kind of made a difference? Because, and I should say, just in kind of context, that of course it's different for everyone, but I think it's always interesting. Like, what for you did you feel? Was there? It maybe just been a kind of more general kind. I
mean, there were tools. I mean, the stop was very helpful, and EFT was very helpful. Kind of relaxing into the symptoms. I'd use EFT sometimes on how I felt about the symptom, sometimes very kind of simply just kind of using it on the feeling about it. Other times kind of opening myself up to be able to feel in a different way with kind of reframes and stuff. So that was really helpful, combined with stops.
Yes.
Sometimes kind of in the moment when I was feeling kind of but other times kind of before and afterwards, and just chipping away. So this hour and a little bit that I'd spend each day on the stuff, that gradually created shifts.
Yes.
So kind of that process of EFT, kind of self-hypnosis, meditation, stops, just kind of using all the tools that I had in just a gradual way, create shifts. And at the time, it often didn't feel like I was making any progress.
See, I'm really glad you said that. Something else that I wanted to just emphasize, that I imagine there were lots of times that you were doing your EFT or you were doing your stops, whatever, and there were times it felt like it was having no effect and it was completely pointless?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of it felt like, that plateau. Yeah. Definitely. It didn't feel like that I was making any progress. No, at times.
Yeah.
Sometimes there were breakthroughs,
Yes.
but yeah, just kind of, I just kept at it in
Yeah.
just a determined way, I think.
And can you say anything about that determination, like the kind of where, like was that a kind of like courageous, like or was it just like I have no choice, like I've just got to?
Part of it, I think, was just I was at such a low ebb that I don't know what else I was going to spend my time doing.
Right.
So I mean, in those 2 hours, I mean, yeah, I felt like I was fighting for my life,
Yeah.
and I think we all have that capacity.
Yes.
And my mum would say I was a bit like a ferret. Once I had hold of it, I wouldn't let anything go, and I would just keep at it. And I'd try and give myself perspective. So often before, when I sat down to do my meditation and things, I'd ask myself, so what progress have I made?
Yes.
Trying to kind of look at the little bits of progress that I had made.
Yes.
And I mean, I also didn't have endless funds, but we'd speak to someone probably from the clinic like once a month for half an hour or so. And that was helpful because they could just give me these little insights that I couldn't always see from within.
Yeah.
So kind of the combination, really. Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like you use Secrets to Recovery quite a bit as well.
Yeah, no, I did. I the stories were really helpful for me.
Yeah. Except for when they were kind of a sense of, well, I don't get it.
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah.
But it's a really good point that you made there. That's why I wanted to emphasize it.
That was really helpful. And also trying to relax into activity. So I'd also use stops. So if I was doing something and a pattern like, what if I crash or whatever came up, I'd come into my body and try and be more centered and be there, or remind myself that when I do relax, it's okay, that kind of thing. That was really helpful.
Yeah.
There's anything that enabled me to relax into what I was doing. I mean, self-hypnosis, I used, I think it was something from Hypnosis Downloads, which was a panic attack one, which was really interesting because you'd watch yourself being kind of in that situation from afar, not even trying to be confident, but just watch it. So it's almost like you got desensitized to it.
Well, it brings up something else that you said when we were speaking on the phone last week, that there's the sense that the kind of place that you kind of found that, like, whatever's going on, there is also a place, even if you don't feel okay, there is this place where you are okay. I don't know, you're going to touch on that a little bit.
It's more with hindsight, I think. I mean, I would find it in meditation, that place, and I would find it, I used to do a pain meditation. I was often in my stomach, was in loads of pain, so sleep was hard. I did take amitriptyline to help with the pain, and that was really helpful sleep-wise. I think I know Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith recommended it because it can help, and that was helpful. But yeah, so when I was doing this pain meditation, I could be at peace with real amounts of pain, which was really nice.
Not trying to get rid of it to be at peace, but being at peace with what was actually there.
And the awareness behind it, the watcher or whatever you call that space. So that was really helpful. But what was interesting looking back and kind of what has enabled me to get more relaxed and kind of the remaining anxiety to lessen is just that, the realization that whenever my mind gets a bit quiet, I feel okay.
Even if what's happening around you or in your body is maybe not what you want, if you can quieten in response to it.
Yeah, and yes, exactly. And it wasn't, or now it's not like I quieten it, it just kind of arises. I just notice it throughout the day, this very normal feeling of okay that just rises up when my mind gets a bit quiet.
But of course, that's something that a lot of practice over time has gone into cultivate.
Yeah. I mean, it has. What's interesting to me is it's more kind of just an awareness of it that lets me be aware of it, rather than I sometimes find when I try and get there, it's a bit difficult.
Sure, I get it.
And so at the time, like looking back, I would sit on the veranda when I was in my darkest times. I'd look out over the sky, and I'd just feel fine, even though I felt like I'd lost everything. And I remember there was a Secrets to Recovery, I think, at the handout, and it said like nutrition, psychology, spirituality. I just crossed out, because for me that was just like that was New Age and religious. But just that realization, looking back, that there were moments, and normally every day, when I felt okay. And to me, that's what I describe as kind of innate well-being. That's just there below the thoughts.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you touched on it a bit earlier, as you started to kind of recognize that you were recovering, and you're saying going out on bike rides, and say a bit more about like what it was like to, after kind of, I guess it was 4 years at this point that you'd been ill for, like.
So I think about 3. I think.
Yeah.
3 or 4. I can't remember exactly.
So what was that like?
It was exciting. And
Yeah.
I can remember kind of cycling through the kind of, the English countryside, kind of the dappled light, just feeling, like, wow, this is different. And going and meeting my friends, some of them I hadn't seen in years. Went to a small festival that a friend put on. It was just kind of being around them was really nice. So there was a real sense of hope. As I said, because almost like because I'd been to such a dark place, I had picked up unhelpful patterns.
Sure.
It's almost like, to me, it's like a magnifying glass, chronic fatigue. Even with some of the people that I've worked with, it's like your issues are kind of exaggerated by going to such a challenging place.
Yeah.
And so these things have been kind of made more challenging. So there were times of real hope when I got better, but there were also challenging times dealing with these kind of remaining patterns.
Yeah, that's what I was also going to ask you about. Was it a straight line from that kind of?
No.
So you did the 90-day program. You learnt these tools. Initially, it was kind of bumpy, and you went home and you started to see some signs of improvement. So then you started to be able to do some more physical things and to kind of. But what was, how did you navigate those kind of bumps in the road?
Again, it was the same tools. I just found them really helpful. So because one of the things that I really identified that was really helpful was when I started to drive my recovery, when I wouldn't be accepting of where I was.
Yes, you try and force it.
Trying to force it. So locating the things that were making me force it were really helpful.
Okay.
So like I had a thing where one was getting a girlfriend, and a second one was being better by the time I'm 30, and I was 30 last week, so I've been better for a few years. But at the time, it was a thing in my head. It was like, if I'm not better by the time I'm 30, it's the end of the world.
Okay.
And
but those pressures are unhelpful, right?
Yeah,
they just create
absolutely.
more stress.
So it was kind of seeing what it was, and then being able to work on those things that was making me kind of drive, and just, as I kind of put it, relax into the process of recovery.
Yes.
So there'd be times I get anxious. There'd be times like I'd have a blip. There'd be times where I go backwards. But knowing that was kind of normal and relaxing to that the best that I could was really, really helpful.
Yeah.
So it was kind of probably from going to the clinic to kind of not having chronic fatigue was about 1.5 years.
Yeah.
But there were lots of kind of bumps along the way,
Sure.
and mastering my resources in that way was just really, really helpful.
Yeah. What was the point that you knew you were fully recovered? Was there a particular moment, or in hindsight, is there a moment, or was it just a kind of gradual kind of recognition?
I mean, it was a bit just kind of exercising, being able to, I was able to kind of push my body quite hard. So I could kind of, stay up quite late with people, and then work out the next day or train, or skip or do something. You just get my body and so it was kind of a proving thing, because at the time it'd be like, oh no, I don't know if this is going to work, and then I'd be, no, I'm going to prove this, because I just felt that was the right thing at that moment to do. At that
stage, yeah.
And so then I'd prove it, and after proving it enough times, it's like, okay, I don't think I have chronic fatigue anymore.
So you kind of collected evidence in a sense.
Yeah.
But of course, that proving it before you were ready to would have just gathered more evidence that you weren't recovered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was kind of that, and I think knowing that a lot of my symptoms were created by anxiety and kind of the emotional side of things.
Yes.
And that once I was in a more healing state, it was only as I said, it was only a few weeks it seemed to kind of heal. It wasn't very long. So in my mind, it was like if I began to slip back into those patterns, it was like, okay, so I know that if I just respond to this in a relaxed way, it will be okay.
Yeah, and of course that was still an 18-month journey of integrating that, but the recognition was there.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, I know that you then went on and did the practitioner training course, and I don't know if you want to say anything about what your life is like now on the other side, and perhaps how having the experience of ME chronic fatigue changed the trajectory of your life in a sense.
And I think I remember just as I was getting ill, I decided I wanted to be a therapist, but I was going to go in a more traditional kind of, I guess, a traditional route. And yeah, just the power or the impact that these techniques had on my life and these understandings was huge. And I couldn't really believe with EFT that I could completely begin to work at a belief by removing all emotion from a negative memory, or with stops, I could actually change my negative kind of patterns.
And your symptoms, yeah.
And my symptoms.
Yeah.
So it really reinforced the power of those techniques to me. Because I mean, initially when I first did EFT, I was like, what is this? And
that's not an uncommon response.
Yeah, and I would tap on kind of, I don't know if this is going to work.
Right.
So kind of, the course has just, I guess, solidified that and enabled me to, probably the first year, because I did it over almost 3, with the first year just to solidify that on myself. And then be able to kind of bring, I guess, my experience and knowledge of using those tools quite extensively to others has been, quite exciting to see the results, to see people go from kind of really anxious to not that anxious, or, kind of down, going through 3-month periods of kind of depression to that not happening anymore, and just seeing the way that if you can begin to change those patterns of thought or those habitual responses to your emotions, that things can really shift. So yeah, it's been a really exciting opportunity to kind of get in touch with the clinic and then come across a kind of way of working with people that seems often more effective, because I've been in traditional counselling than just talking, because that has, to me, often a limit in its efficacy. So yeah, it's been a really exciting, quite fun, challenging journey, I guess, since then.
And what's life like now for you?
It's cool.
Technical term.
So kind of just in the process of setting up kind of a practice, but which is fun in itself, but also just enjoying ordinary life. I guess to me, this sense of feeling okay, or this that's always in the background, just comes up in my life more and more without me practicing, which is interesting. I don't meditate anymore, but I am far more present and kind of in ordinary life, seeing how extraordinary it is, kind of the intricacy of each moment, that often you can be anesthetized by your thoughts too. And so that's been one of the biggest shifts, is just kind of being in this really ordinary, beautiful space where I can just appreciate whatever's happening.
Yes.
And most often be at peace to whatever's happening in my life. Because my stomach still hasn't properly recovered, and still a bad night sometimes. But it doesn't really bother me.
Yeah, it's like your physical energy's recovered, and there's still a kind of sensitivity there that's kind of you're working with, but ultimately you can live your life anyway. Yeah,
I live my life in a full extent, and not worry when it goes kind of a little bit wrong, which I would have in the past.
And what would you say to, if that younger you was watching this right now, and perhaps was kind of skeptical and cynical about kind of what we're talking about and what we're saying, and is kind of in that place of feeling somewhat desperate and kind of frustrated, what would you say to that you?
So the thing that comes to mind is just that when I was much younger and you have a scary experience, I remember kind of having a car crash when I was about 19, and the amount of adrenaline that came up and how exhausted I was afterwards. Just to point towards that, that our fear response is knackering, and that really it's designed to make us feel uncomfortable. So that can make symptoms worse, or that can put you not in a healing state. So just to remember that, and to know also that there is this space where you can feel okay even when all of life feels kind of really challenging. I think it would be those two things. And also, to me, there is this strength to the human spirit that if we tap into, and often it is there again when we kind of not lost in kind of not particularly helpful thinking, we can tap into, and we can really use to kind of work through very, very challenging times. So I guess those things.
Great, brilliant. Well, look, David, thank you so much for sharing so kind of openly of your story. I think these stories are such an inspiration to other people, and I'm really glad you kind of made this point around, it's like it can look kind of courageous and clear from a kind of perspective of hindsight. But of course, when we're going through it, that's often not how it feels. And so I think it's a great point to make. So thank you very much.
Cool.
Great.
Thank you.
And for those of you watching, thank you for watching. If you want to find any more information on the clinic, you can go to freedomfromme.co.uk, and you can find more information on Secrets to Recovery at secretstorecovery.com. Also, just to let people know, it always feels a bit odd kind of plugging your own things, but all the proceeds do go to the charity anyway. The third edition of my book has just come out. I know there's a bunch of people that were waiting to send them copies for quite a while, but they have all been sent out. There's a little bit change from the second edition, mainly just a few little updates. And if you have read the book and you've enjoyed it, it's also immensely helpful if you go to Amazon and you just write a review about the book. It really helps people that are curious to find out a bit more. And of course, you can also order the book from there as well. So the next Secrets Recovery Live will now be in January. So it feels a bit kind of early to wish for Happy Christmas, Happy New Year. But thank you so much, everyone, for all of their support through this year. And we look forward to having some very exciting projects happening here at Optimal Health Clinic next year. And of course, Secrets Recovery Live will be back in January. So thanks again, David. Thank you everyone for watching, and we will talk with you then. Bye-bye.